Isaiah Washington stares at his son's X-ray in disbelief. Malcolm's femur completely snapped. The security footage plays on his phone, a white flight attendant yanking his one-year-old son from the aisle seat. "Daddy, I just wanted water," Malcolm whispers through tears. Isaiah's phone rings, CNN calling. Before we dive deeper into this shocking story, let me know where you're watching from. Hit that like button and subscribe to stay updated on more stories of justice prevailing against discrimination. What would you do if you were in Isaiah's position? Let's find out how this father turned a tragedy into transformation. The morning had started with such promise. Isaiah Jenkins adjusted his tie in the mirror of their Atlanta home, watching his son Malcolm carefully pack his science project materials into a carry-on bag. At 42, Isaiah had built a reputation as one of the most respected corporate attorneys in Georgia, but no achievement compared to raising his gifted 11-year-old son. "You got everything, champ?" Isaiah asked, checking his watch. Their flight to Boston departed in 3 hours, and he wanted to arrive at the airport with plenty of time. Malcolm nodded enthusiastically, his bright eyes shining with excitement. "First plane ride. Do you think we'll go above the clouds, Dad?" Isaiah smiled, though his mind was partially occupied with the Stevens merger case, waiting for him upon their return. "Way above them. You'll see the whole world from up there." The Boston trip served two purposes. Malcolm would compete in the National Junior Science Olympiad, representing his school as the youngest finalist, while Isaiah would steal a few hours for a client meeting. It wasn't ideal, but as a single father since losing his wife Jasmine to cancer 3 years ago, Isaiah constantly juggled responsibilities. "I wish Mom could see me compete," Malcolm said, quietly zipping his bag closed. Before we dive deeper into this shocking story, let me know where you're watching from. Hit that like button and subscribe to stay updated on more stories of justice prevailing against discrimination. What would you do if you were in Isaiah's position? Let's find out how this father turned a tragedy into transformation. The morning had started with such promise. Isaiah Jenkins adjusted his tie in the mirror of their Atlanta home, watching his son Malcolm carefully pack his science project materials into a carry-on bag. At 42, Isaiah had built a reputation as one of the most respected corporate attorneys in Georgia, but no achievement compared to raising his gifted 11-year-old son. Atlantic Skyways wasn't Isaiah's preferred airline. Recent news stories had highlighted several incidents involving racial bias among staff, but the direct flight fit their schedule perfectly, and the company had issued public apologies, promising improved training for employees. "You got everything, champ?" Isaiah asked, checking his watch. Their flight to Boston departed in 3 hours, and he wanted to arrive at the airport with plenty of time. "There seems to be a ticket issue, Mr. Jenkins. The system shows your upgrade to first class, but your son remains in economy." Atlantic Skyways wasn't Isaiah's preferred airline. Recent news stories had highlighted several incidents involving racial bias among staff, but the direct flight fit their schedule perfectly, and the company had issued public apologies, promising improved training for employees. Isaiah shook his head. "That's impossible. I specifically requested seats together." Isaiah faced an uncomfortable choice: accept the separation or give up his upgrade and lose the comfortable space he needed to review case files during the flight. "It's okay, Dad," Malcolm said, reading his father's expression. "I'm not a baby. I can handle sitting by myself for a few hours." The guilt weighed heavily on Isaiah. 60-hour work weeks meant he relied too often on Malcolm's grandmother for childcare. This trip was supposed to be different quality time together, celebrating Malcolm's achievements. The airport hummed with activity as they checked in. At the counter, the attendant frowned at her screen. What Isaiah couldn't know was that seat 27C fell within Heather Brooks's service section. At 31, Heather was a recent hire at Atlantic Skyways, brought on during a staffing shortage after the pandemic. Her personnel file, which would later become crucial evidence, contained multiple customer complaints from her previous 6 months of service, none of which had been adequately addressed by management. Isaiah settled into 3, a spacious and comfortable, while Malcolm headed further back to 27C. From his premium seat, Isaiah couldn't see his son, but he convinced himself Malcolm would be fine. After all, the flight attendants would ensure his safety and comfort. When Heather Brooks passed through for the initial cabin check, she glanced at Malcolm with barely concealed annoyance. Malcolm offered a smile, which went unreturned as she continued down the aisle, stopping to chat warmly with the White family seated across from him. "Excuse me," Malcolm called politely as she turned to leave. "Could I please have some water when you have a moment?" Heather nodded curtly, without making eye contact. After takeoff, as the plane climbed into the clear blue sky, Malcolm stared out the window past Mrs. Winters, marveling at how the world below transformed into a miniature model. His excitement momentarily overrode his growing thirst, but as the flight leveled off and the seatbelt sign dimmed, he found himself anxiously watching the aisle for Heather's return with refreshments. She never came to his row. 1 hour into the flight, Malcolm's throat felt increasingly dry. The cabin air, recycled and arid, only worsened his discomfort. He watched as Heather Brooks methodically worked her way through the cabin, serving drinks to other passengers. Strangely, she seemed to skip his row each time she passed with her cart. "Excuse me," Malcolm tried again as Heather moved past this time, pretending not to hear him. Elaine Winters, the elderly white woman beside him, noticed his unsuccessful attempts. "Are you all right, young man?" she asked, her voice gentle with concern. "I'm just really thirsty, ma'am," Malcolm replied. "I've been trying to get some water." Reluctantly, Isaiah accepted the arrangement. "I'll check on you during the flight," he promised, feeling the familiar twist of parental guilt as they separated during boarding. No one came. 15 minutes passed. Malcolm pressed his own button. Still nothing. Across the aisle, a white boy, approximately Malcolm's age, received a soda and cookies from Heather, who chatted amiably with his parents. The contrast wasn't lost on Elaine, whose expression hardened as she observed the different treatment. What Malcolm and Elaine couldn't know was that Heather Brooks carried a troubling history. Before joining Atlantic Skyways, she'd been terminated from her position at Westfield Shopping Center after multiple incidents of racial profiling. She'd followed black customers around stores, questioned their payment methods, and once called security on a group of black teenagers who were simply sitting in the food court. Atlantic Skyways, desperate to fill positions during the post-pandemic travel surge, had conducted only cursory background checks, missing these red flags entirely. Malcolm shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his mouth dry, developing a headache from dehydration. He recalled his father's frequent talks about navigating situations like this. "You have to be twice as good, twice as polite," Isaiah had explained after Malcolm experienced racism at school. "It's not fair, but it's the reality we live in." Trying to follow that advice, Malcolm waited patiently, even as his discomfort grew. The flight tracker on the screen showed they still had over an hour before landing in Boston. After his third ignored call button attempt, Malcolm decided he needed to be more direct. Unbuckling his seatbelt, he stood carefully in the narrow space beside his seat, hoping to catch Heather's attention as she passed by. Elaine Winters noticed his distress and placed a supportive hand on his arm. "I'll back you up, dear. This isn't right." Across the aisle, Jordan Thompson, a 22-year-old college student returning from spring break, had been watching the situation unfold with increasing concern. Discreetly, he unlocked his phone and positioned it to record, sensing the situation might require documentation. When Heather finally approached their section again, Malcolm raised his hand politely. "Excuse me, miss, I've been trying to get some water for over an hour. Could I please have a cup?" Heather's reaction was immediate and disproportionate. "Sir, you need to be in your seat with your seatbelt fastened," she said, loudly drawing attention from nearby passengers. "I just need some water," Malcolm explained, his voice small but steady. I pressed the call button several times. "I'm serving passengers as quickly as I can," Heather snapped, her voice carrying through the cabin. "You need to be patient and follow flight regulations." Elaine intervened, her voice sharp with indignation. "This child has been nothing but patient. He's been asking politely for water for over an hour while you've served everyone around us." "Ma'am, please don't involve yourself," Heather replied dismissively. "I'm handling the situation." By now, other passengers had turned to observe the exchange. Malcolm increasingly uncomfortable, as the center of attention started to sit down again, when Heather added, "This is exactly why unaccompanied minors need supervision." "I'm not unaccompanied," Malcolm corrected softly. "My dad's in first class." Something in Heather's expression changed at this information, a flash of disbelief, or perhaps resentment. "Well, you still need to follow instructions and stay seated unless given permission to move about the cabin." As Malcolm began to explain that he had only stood to get her attention, Heather summoned her supervisor over the intercom. Moments later, Darren Walker, a 47-year-old cabin supervisor with 17 years at Atlantic Skyways, arrived at their row. "What seems to be the problem here?" Darren asked immediately, positioning himself beside Heather, creating an imposing barrier in the narrow aisle. Before Malcolm could speak, Heather offered her version of events. "This young man refuses to remain seated and has been disrupting service." "That's simply not true," Elaine interjected firmly. "He's been ignored for over an hour while asking for water. I witnessed it all." Darren glanced at Elaine dismissively. "Ma'am, please allow us to handle this." His tone suggested he viewed her as a confused elderly person rather than a credible witness. Malcolm felt his chest tightening with anxiety as the two airline employees towered over him. "I just wanted some water," he repeated, his voice cracking slightly. Jordan Thompson, still recording discreetly from across the aisle, spoke up. "I've been watching too. The kid's done nothing wrong." Rather than de-escalating the situation, Darren doubled down, backing his colleague without investigation. This pattern would later be revealed as common practice for him, supporting crew members regardless of circumstances, particularly when passenger complaints involved racial elements. "Young man, I need you to understand that disrupting flight crew duties is a serious offense," Darren stated firmly. "If you continue, we'll have no choice but to report this incident to the authorities upon landing." Malcolm, trained by his father to remain calm during unjust situations, felt tears welling in his eyes. He had done nothing wrong, followed all the rules he'd been taught, yet was being treated like a criminal. The injustice of it all overwhelmed his young mind. "I'm going back to my seat," he said, quietly turning to sit down. What happened next would change everything. As Malcolm turned to return to his seat, Heather Brooks reached out and grabbed his arm. "Don't walk away when we're addressing you," she snapped, her fingers digging into his skin. The sudden physical contact startled Malcolm, who instinctively pulled back. The narrow confines of the airplane aisle left little room for movement, creating a dangerous situation as the struggle escalated in seconds. "Let me go," Malcolm gasped, frightened by the unexpected aggression. Heather maintained her grip, pulling Malcolm toward her as Darren moved to assist his colleague. The power dynamic was grotesquely uneven, two adults using physical force against an 11-year-old child who simply wanted water. "You need to calm down right now," Darren commanded, misreading Malcolm's fear as defiance. Jordan Thompson stood up his phone, now recording openly. "Hey, you can't manhandle a kid like that," he shouted. Elaine Winters also rose from her seat, her face flushed with anger. "Stop this immediately. He's done nothing wrong." Other passengers began voicing concerns, creating a cacophony of protest that only seemed to harden Heather and Darren's resolve to assert their authority. In the struggle, Malcolm twisted away from Heather's grip, trying to retreat to the safety of his seat. As he turned, his foot caught on the aisle carpet. Off balance, and still being pulled by Heather, he fell awkwardly, his leg striking the metal armrest of the aisle seat at a terrible angle. The sound that followed silenced the entire cabin, a sickening crack that could only mean one thing. Malcolm's scream pierced the recycled air of the cabin, a sound of pure agony that sent chills through everyone who heard it. His femur, the strongest bone in the human body, had snapped completely under the force of the impact. "My leg," he wailed, collapsing to the floor of the aisle, his body contorting in pain. "Please, my leg." For a moment, nobody moved. The horror of what had just occurred paralyzed everyone, including Heather and Darren, whose faces drained of color as they realized the severity of the situation. Jordan Thompson's phone captured everything, the aggressive handling, the fall, the unmistakable sound of breaking bone, and now Malcolm writhing on the floor in agony, while flight attendants stood frozen in shock. "Oh my God," someone whispered from a few rows back. Elaine was the first to act, kneeling beside Malcolm despite her arthritic knees. "Don't move him," she instructed firmly. "He needs medical attention immediately." Darren finally snapped out of his stupor. "We need to return to our seats and—" "Are you insane?" Jordan interrupted, his voice shaking with rage. "You just broke this kid's leg. He needs emergency medical attention." Passengers began using their phones, some recording, others trying to alert loved ones about the situation. The video Jordan had captured was already being uploaded to his social media accounts, where it would soon spiral into viral territory. Heather, seemingly unable to process her role in the disaster, attempted damage control. He was resisting crew instructions, and, rather than de-escalating the situation, Darren doubled down, backing his colleague without investigation. This pattern would later be revealed as common practice for him, supporting crew members regardless of circumstances, particularly when passenger complaints involved racial elements. Malcolm, through his pain, called out the only word that mattered to him in that moment: "Dad." As if summoned by his son's cry, a commotion began at the front of the economy section. Someone was pushing through, moving against the tide of concerned onlookers gathering in the aisles. Isaiah Jenkins had felt something was wrong. After an hour without checking on his son, a sense of parental intuition had pulled him from his comfortable first-class seat. Now, hearing his son scream, he fought his way toward the sound, with the desperation only a parent could understand. What he saw upon reaching row 27 would forever be burned into his memory. His son lying on the floor, leg bent at an impossible angle, surrounded by strangers, while airline staff stood by in apparent shock. Malcolm Isaiah dropped to his knees beside his son, legal training temporarily forgotten in the face of paternal instinct. "Daddy," Malcolm sobbed, reaching for his father's hand. "It hurts so bad." Isaiah cradled his son's head gently, then looked up at the flight attendants with an expression that made them step back involuntarily. When he spoke, his voice was terrifyingly calm. "What did you do to my son?" The atmosphere in the cabin crackled with tension as Isaiah Jenkins knelt beside his injured son. His question hung in the air unanswered as Heather and Darren exchanged nervous glances. "Sir, your son was being disruptive," and Darren began, but was immediately cut off. "Did I ask what my son was doing?" Isaiah's voice remained measured, controlled, the voice of a man who had argued before the Supreme Court. "I asked what you did to him." As a corporate attorney with 15 years of experience, Isaiah Jenkins had developed the ability to remain outwardly calm while internally calculating every angle of a situation. Now, as he assessed his son's injury, that legal mind cataloged evidence even through his parental distress. "The captain has been notified," Darren continued. "We're diverting to Philadelphia for emergency landing. Medical personnel will meet us at the gate." Isaiah nodded curtly, turning his attention back to Malcolm, who was pale and trembling from pain and shock. "Stay with me, son. Help is coming." Behind them, a flight attendant tried to disperse the gathering crowd. "Everyone, please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts for landing." "Not a chance," Jordan Thompson replied, still recording. "I'm documenting everything until that boy gets medical attention." Elaine Winters hadn't moved from Malcolm's side. "I'm staying with him, too. What these people did is unconscionable." As the plane began its descent toward Philadelphia, Isaiah whispered to his son, "I need you to be brave for a little longer. Can you do that for me?" Malcolm nodded through his tears. "I was just asking for water, Dad. I did everything like you taught me." Isaiah's heart broke at those words. All the careful instructions he'd given his son about navigating a world that wouldn't always treat him fairly, be polite, be respectful, be twice as good, none of it had protected Malcolm from this. "I know you did," Isaiah assured him. "This is not your fault." The plane landed roughly 20 minutes later, and paramedics boarded immediately. As they stabilized Malcolm's leg for transport, Isaiah overheard Darren speaking quietly to Heather. "Stick to the script." The boy was uncooperative and injured himself while resisting instructions. Isaiah's legal instincts kicked into high gear. Turning to Jordan, he said, "You recorded this." Jordan nodded. "Everything. Already backed it up to cloud storage, too." "I'll need that footage," Isaiah said. "And your contact information." As the paramedics prepared to move, Malcolm Isaiah addressed the surrounding passengers. "If anyone witnessed what happened here today, I'd appreciate your contact information. My son deserves justice." Several passengers immediately came forward, including Elaine Winters, who pressed a business card into Isaiah's hand. "I saw everything." That flight attendant ignored him for over an hour, then manhandled him when he simply asked for water. "I'll testify anywhere, anytime." As they began to exit the aircraft, Isaiah noticed airline representatives waiting in the jetway, clipboards in hand. Mr. Jenkins, a woman in an Atlantic Skyways uniform, approached. "I'm Veronica Martinez, Customer Relations Manager. On behalf of Atlantic Skyways, we want to express our deepest—" "Save it," Isaiah interrupted. "Your staff broke my 11-year-old son's femur. There's nothing you can say right now that matters. Sir, if you could just fill out these incident report forms." Isaiah fixed her with a look that stopped her mid-sentence. I'm a corporate attorney. Those forms are designed to limit your liability and will not be signed by either myself or my son. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number from memory. Zoe, it's Isaiah. I need you to meet me at Philadelphia Children's Hospital. It's an emergency involving Malcolm. After a brief pause, yes, it's racial, and it's bad. Bring the whole team. As the paramedics wheeled Malcolm toward the waiting ambulance, Isaiah heard his phone ping with a notification. Jordan had sent him the video footage, which was already accumulating thousands of views online. The airline representatives followed them to the ambulance, still attempting damage control. Mr. Jenkins Atlantic Skyways would like to offer complimentary tickets, and what you're going to offer, Isaiah replied without breaking stride, is an explanation for why your employee assaulted my son for requesting water. As the ambulance doors closed, Isaiah held Malcolm's hand while the paramedics administered pain medication. On his phone, he saw the first news alert: child allegedly injured by flight attendant video goes viral. This was just the beginning. So, what would you do if you were in Isaiah's position? Was his calm, calculated approach the right one? Or would you have reacted differently? Comment 1 if you think Isaiah handled the situation perfectly, or 2 if you believe he should have been more forceful with the airline staff right away. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories of justice prevailing against discrimination. Now, what do you think will happen when they reach the hospital? Will Atlantic Skyways try to cover up their mistake, or will they take responsibility for their actions? Let's continue this powerful story and find out. The emergency room at Philadelphia Children's Hospital buzzed with activity as Malcolm was wheeled through the automatic doors, Isaiah jogging alongside the gurney, still holding his son's hand. 11-year-old male, complete femur fracture, stable vitals, but significant pain, the paramedic reported to the waiting trauma team. Injury occurred approximately 40 minutes ago during an airline incident. Dr. Samantha Rivera, the attending physician, glanced curiously at Isaiah. Airline incident. Your staff can brief you on the medical details, Isaiah replied firmly. I need to stay with my son. The next hour passed in a blur of x-rays, pain medication adjustments, and consultations with orthopedic specialists. Malcolm, now slightly sedated, drifted in and out of consciousness, while Isaiah maintained his position at his son's bedside, alternating between comforting words and hushed phone conversations with his law partners. When a hospital social worker entered the room, clipboard in hand, Isaiah recognized the protocol immediately. A black child with a severe injury would automatically trigger questions about the circumstances, questions that might not be asked of a white family in the same situation. Mr. Jenkins, I'm Brianna Taylor from Child Services. I have a few routine questions about what happened today. Isaiah nodded respectfully, but remained guarded. Of course. Can you explain how your son sustained this injury? Before Isaiah could answer, the curtain parted again as Elaine Winters entered, still wearing her flight attire. I can explain exactly what happened, she announced, her voice carrying the authority of her 76 years. I witnessed the entire incident. This child was assaulted by airline staff after being denied water for over an hour. Brianna's expression shifted as she looked between Elaine and Isaiah. You're not family. I was seated next to Malcolm on the flight, Elaine explained. I followed the ambulance here because I couldn't in good conscience leave without ensuring this child receives justice. As Elaine recounted the events, Brianna's documentation shifted from potential family investigation to incident report. Isaiah noticed the change with relief. The last thing he needed was defending himself while advocating for his son. Dr. Rivera returned with the orthopedic specialist Dr. Michael Chen, who carried Malcolm's x-rays. It's a complete femoral shaft fracture, Dr. Chen explained, pointing to the clear break on the film. Given his age and the severity, we're recommending surgical intervention with titanium rod placement. He'll need several months of recovery and physical therapy. Isaiah nodded, absorbing the information while maintaining his composure. When can you perform the surgery? We're prepping an OR now, Dr. Rivera replied. The good news is that children his age typically heal well with proper treatment. The bad news, Isaiah finished for her, is that my son will miss his science competition, spend months in recovery, and carry this trauma forever because airline employees assaulted him for requesting water. The room fell silent at the controlled fury in Isaiah's voice. Before anyone could respond, the curtain parted once again. Two people in Atlantic Skyways uniforms entered, a middle-aged man with an executive name badge and a younger woman carrying a portfolio. Mr. Jenkins, I'm Douglas Freeman, Regional Operations Director for Atlantic Skyways. This is Lindsay Parker from our legal department. First, let me express our sincere regret about your son's injury. Isaiah's expression remained impassive. Is that an admission of fault, Mr. Freeman? Lindsay stepped forward quickly. We're here to offer immediate assistance with medical expenses and compensation for your inconvenience. She extended a folder. These forms would expedite the process. Those are liability waivers, Isaiah stated flatly, not bothering to examine them.
My son hasn't even gone into surgery yet, and you're already attempting to limit damages.
Douglas's professional smile faltered. Mr. Jenkins, we're simply trying to make this situation right. By having me sign away our rights to further legal action, Isaiah finished. I'm familiar with these tactics. I've represented corporations, employing them. The airline representatives exchanged glances, recalibrating their approach. In the bed beside them, Malcolm stirred his eyes, fluttering open as the medication began wearing off. Dad, he called, weakly. Isaiah immediately turned his attention to his son, effectively dismissing the airline representatives. I'm here, Malcolm. Are they going to fix my leg? Yes, son. The doctors are going to take good care of you. Malcolm's eyes drifted to the airline representative's recognition dawning on his face. Fear flashed across his features as he gripped his father's hand tighter. Are they here to get me in trouble? The innocent question cut through the room like a knife. Here was an injured child facing major surgery, worried that he was somehow in trouble for being victimized. Before Isaiah could respond, the curtain parted once more. A woman in her late 30s entered, exuding confidence in her tailored suit. Behind her followed a younger man carrying several electronic devices. Isaiah, the woman acknowledged before turning piercing eyes on the airline representatives. I'm Zoe Washington, lead partner at Washington & Jenkins Civil Rights Division. This is Derek Monroe, our digital forensics expert. Her tone left no doubt that the balance of power in the room had just shifted dramatically. We're in the middle of a private discussion with Mr. Jenkins, Lindsay began. Zoe smiled without warmth. There's nothing private about attempting to have a distressed parent sign liability waivers before his injured child enters surgery. It's actually explicitly prohibited by state law under duress provisions. Derek was already setting up equipment on the small hospital table. We've secured multiple witness statements and video evidence from the flight. Jordan Thompson's complete footage is being downloaded now, unedited and time-stamped. The airline representative's demeanor shifted visibly. Perhaps we should continue this conversation at a more appropriate time. Douglas suggested, edging toward the door. Perhaps you shouldn't continue it at all without your senior counsel present, Zoe replied smoothly. And I suggest you preserve all evidence related to this incident, including personnel files for both flight attendants involved. A formal legal notice will be on your CEO's desk within the hour. After the airline representatives departed, Zoe turned to Isaiah, her professional demeanor softening as she approached Malcolm's bedside. Hey there, brave guy, she said gently. Your dad and I are going to make sure everything gets fixed okay. Malcolm nodded tiredly. The flight attendant hurt me because she didn't like me, he said simply, his child's mind cutting through to the heart of the matter. Isaiah felt the familiar pain of a parent, unable to protect their child from the world's cruelty. Malcolm, I need to step outside with Aunt Zoe for a few minutes while the doctors prepare for your surgery. Mrs. Winters will stay with you, okay? In the hallway away from Malcolm's ears, Isaiah finally allowed his composed facade to crack. They broke my son's leg, Zoe. He asked for water, and they broke his leg. Zoe placed a supportive hand on his shoulder. I saw the video. It's already at 2 million views. This is one of the clearest cases of excessive force and discrimination I've ever seen. I don't want just money, Isaiah said firmly. I want structural change. I want accountability. And we'll get it, Zoe assured him. But first, we focus on Malcolm. Everything else comes after he's stable. Isaiah nodded briefly, closing his eyes to center himself. When he opened them, he saw Richard Whitman, CEO of Atlantic Skyways, striding down the hospital corridor with an entourage of executives and lawyers. "They sent the big guns fast," Zoe observed. "That means they're terrified." Isaiah straightened his posture, attorney mode fully engaged. "Good. They should be." 3 days after Malcolm's surgery, Isaiah transformed the hospital suite into an impromptu command center. Atlantic Skyways had tried to manage the situation through traditional crisis public relations, but they were outmatched from the start. Malcolm lay in the adjustable bed, his heavily casted leg elevated, watching cartoons on the room's television while a muted news channel played on Isaiah's laptop. The story had exploded across national media with the hashtag number Justice for Malcolm trending on every platform. "How are you feeling this morning, champ?" Isaiah asked, setting aside a stack of legal documents to focus on his son. Malcolm offered a small smile. "The medicine makes the pain better. When can I go home?" "Dr. Chen says maybe tomorrow if your numbers stay good." Isaiah adjusted Malcolm's pillows. "Grandma's getting your room ready, with everything you'll need." Zoe entered carrying coffee and a bag of pastries. "Breakfast for the legal team," she announced, setting them on the conference table they'd had moved into the spacious hospital suite. Behind her followed Derek Monroe, their digital forensics expert, and Alicia Rodriguez, the firm's investigative specialist. They'd been working around the clock since the incident, building what was rapidly becoming an ironclad case. "What's the latest?" Isaiah asked, accepting a coffee. Alicia opened her laptop. "We've been digging into Atlantic Skyways' history. In the past 12 months alone, they've had 24 documented incidents involving racial discrimination against passengers. 17 were quietly settled with NDAs. Any involving physical injuries?" Isaiah asked. 3, Alicia confirmed. "None as severe as Malcolm's, but all following the same pattern: minority passengers accused of non-compliance physical handling by crew members resulting injuries." Derek picked up the thread. "The real bombshell is Heather Brooks' employment history. She was fired from Westfield Mall for racial profiling just 6 months before Atlantic Skyways hired her. Their background check was cursory at best. They never contacted her previous employer for details." And Darren Walker, Isaiah prompted. 17 years with the airline, 14 complaints related to racial bias and how he handled passenger issues. All were dismissed after internal reviews that he himself participated in," Alicia explained. "He was effectively investigating himself." Isaiah absorbed this information, his legal mind connecting dots. "So we have a pattern of institutional negligence in hiring, training, and accountability." "Exactly," Zoe confirmed. "And it gets worse. We obtained their internal crew training materials through a former employee. Their conflict resolution protocols specifically instruct crew to treat noncompliance with firm physical redirection without any consideration for passenger age or circumstances." Isaiah glanced at Malcolm, ensuring he was still absorbed in his cartoon before continuing in a lowered voice. "What's the company's response been since yesterday?" Derek grimaced. "They're trying to contain the damage. Their initial press statement claimed Malcolm was disruptive and non-compliant with safety instructions, but they've been forced to retract it after more passenger videos emerged." "The public reaction?" Isaiah asked. "Overwhelming support for Malcolm," Alicia reported. "Jordan's video has over 15 million views now. Celebrity activists are amplifying the story. 3 major corporate clients of Atlantic Skyways have already suspended their business travel contracts pending investigation." Zoe handed Isaiah a tablet displaying a financial chart. "Their stock dropped 22% at yesterday's closing bell. The market's responding faster than the courts could." Isaiah nodded thoughtfully. "And our witnesses?" "Rock solid," Zoe confirmed. "Elaine Winters has provided a detailed written statement. Jordan Thompson's video speaks for itself. We have contact information for 12 additional passengers willing to testify about what they saw." A soft knock at the door interrupted their discussion. A nurse entered with Malcolm's morning medication, followed by Dr. Chen for his rounds. "Good morning, Malcolm," the doctor greeted cheerfully. "Let's see how that leg is doing." While Dr. Chen examined Malcolm, Isaiah's phone rang with a familiar number. It was his administrative assistant at the firm. "Isaiah, Richard Whitman's office has called 5 times this morning. The Atlantic Skyways CEO wants to speak with you directly." "No direct communication," Isaiah instructed. Any contact goes through our legal team as established. After finishing the call, Isaiah rejoined the strategy session where Derek was sharing new information. We've identified at least 8 online groups coordinating boycotts of Atlantic Skyways. Their booking system crashed yesterday from the traffic surge of people canceling reservations. Isaiah absorbed this information, then looked toward Malcolm, who was now dozing after his medication. His son's innocence contrasted sharply with the corporate negligence that had put him in this hospital bed. No direct communication, Isaiah instructed. Any contact goes through our legal team as established. Zoe nodded in agreement. What specific demands are you thinking? Isaiah leaned forward, his voice resolute. Complete overhaul of their hiring practices. Independent oversight of discrimination complaints. Mandatory bias training with regular recertification. And transparent public reporting of all incidents. That's ambitious, Alicia noted. My son's future mobility was compromised because he asked for water, while Black Isaiah replied, ambition is the minimum appropriate response. Their planning session was interrupted by another knock. This time it was a delivery person with an enormous floral arrangement. The attached card read, wishing Malcolm a speedy recovery. Please call to discuss resolution options. Richard Whitman, CEO, Atlantic Skyways. Isaiah placed the card on their evidence pile without comment. As the day progressed, more information emerged, strengthening their position. Patricia Reynolds, Atlantic Skyways Chief Safety Officer, had anonymously contacted Zoe with internal documents showing the company had repeatedly ignored recommendations to improve crew training on racial sensitivity. By evening, Malcolm was feeling well enough to ask questions about what would happen next. Dad, am I in trouble with the airplane people? He asked during a quiet moment alone. Isaiah sat on the edge of the hospital bed, carefully avoiding the IV lines. No, Malcolm. You did absolutely nothing wrong. They're the ones in trouble. Will I still be able to do science competitions after my leg heals? Absolutely, Isaiah assured him. And I'm going to make sure what happened to you never happens to another child. Malcolm considered this his young mind, processing concepts of justice well beyond his years. Is that why all those people keep calling you to make things right? Isaiah nodded. That's part of my job as a lawyer, to help make things right when they're wrong. Then I want to help, Malcolm declared with unexpected conviction. I don't want other kids to be scared on airplanes. Looking at his brave, resilient son, Isaiah made a decision. This wouldn't be just another settlement with an NDA. Malcolm's injury would become the catalyst for real change. A transformation of airline culture that would protect future generations. You will help, Isaiah promised. Your voice is going to make a difference. As Malcolm drifted off to sleep, Isaiah returned to his makeshift office in the corner of the hospital room. Zoe had left a preliminary settlement offer from Atlantic Skyways on his table, 8 figures, with standard confidentiality clauses. Without hesitation, Isaiah wrote across it in bold letters. Rejected. Structural reform. Required, and instructed his team to deliver it to Richard Whitman personally. The battle lines were drawn. 1 week after the incident, Isaiah and Malcolm returned to their Atlanta home. Malcolm navigated their front steps on crutches, his leg encased in a heavy cast, decorated with signatures from hospital staff. News vans lined their residential street held at bay only by a security detail Isaiah had reluctantly hired after receiving concerning messages from Airline sympathizers. Home sweet home, Isaiah said, helping Malcolm settle onto the living room couch. Grandma's made your favorite mac and cheese. Malcolm managed a smile despite his obvious discomfort. The physical pain was improving, but the psychological impact remained evident in his jumpiness around strangers and newfound fear of public spaces. In the kitchen, Isaiah's mother, Gloria, placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. How are you holding up? Isaiah exhaled heavily, managing. The legal fight is straightforward, being a dad through this. He trailed off, watching Malcolm through the doorway. You're doing right by him, Gloria assured him. Standing up shows him his value. Isaiah's phone buzzed with Zoe's name. Atlantic Skyways just made their move, she reported without preamble. What happened? Heather Brooks and Darren Walker gave an exclusive interview to National Morning News. They're playing damage control, but it's backfiring spectacularly. Isaiah moved to his home office and pulled up the interview on his computer. The footage showed Heather Brooks in a tailored suit trying to project professionalism as she recounted her version of events. The minor passenger was repeatedly leaving his seat despite clear safety instructions. She claimed her voice steady, but her eyes darting nervously. When I attempted to ensure cabin safety, he became physically resistant. The interviewer, Rebecca Santos, maintained a skeptical expression. Multiple witnesses contradict your account, Miss Brooks. They state the child simply asked for water repeatedly and was ignored. Darren Walker jumped in. Atlantic Skyways maintains strict protocols for passenger safety. Any physical contact was in line with company policy for non-compliant passengers. Even for an 11-year-old child, Rebecca pressed. The camera caught their uncomfortable exchange of glances before Darren continued. Age is not a factor in our safety protocols. That damning admission sent immediate shockwaves through social media. Within hours, the clip had been viewed 20 million times, with commentators and legal experts dissecting the implications of a major airline, admitting they treated children and adults identically during physical interventions. Isaiah's phone hadn't stopped buzzing since the interview aired. When Malcolm asked to watch television after lunch, every channel seemed to be covering the story. On Liberty News Network, Atlantic Skyways faces potential bankruptcy as stock plummets 40% since child injury incident. On American Morning Flight Attendants Union distances itself from Brooks and Walker, claiming they had previously flagged concerns about both employees. On World Report, FAA launches comprehensive investigation into Atlantic Skyways training and safety practices. Isaiah muted the television when he noticed Malcolm's increasing anxiety. Hey, we don't have to watch this. They're talking about me everywhere, Malcolm said quietly. Like I'm not even a real person. That evening, after Malcolm was asleep, Isaiah held a video conference with his legal team. The Atlantic Skyways disaster was now Zoe's firm's top priority, with 6 attorneys working the case full-time. The interview was a gift, Zoe began. Their admission about treating children and adults identically violates federal aviation guidelines. The FAA called us. They want Malcolm's testimony for their investigation. What's the status on the settlement offer? Isaiah asked. They've doubled it, Alicia reported. $20 million with the same confidentiality requirements. Isaiah shook his head. Still no. This isn't about money. There's something else, Derek added. We've been contacted by families of 7 other children who experienced similar discrimination on Atlantic Skyways flights. None with injuries this severe, but the pattern is undeniable. Isaiah considered this information. Class action potential. Absolutely, Zoe confirmed. But there's a more immediate opportunity. Richard Whitman has requested a face-to-face meeting you, Malcolm, if he's able, and their executive team. For what purpose? Allegedly to apologize in person and discuss resolution options. Our sources say Atlantic Skyways board is split. Half want to settle at any cost. Half believe Whitman should resign over the handling of this crisis. Isaiah thought of Malcolm, finally sleeping peacefully after another day of physical therapy and anxiety. I'll meet with them, but not with Malcolm present. He's not a prop for their corporate conscience. 3 days later, Isaiah entered Atlantic Skyways regional headquarters in downtown Atlanta. The building's lobby, usually bustling with employee activity, felt eerily quiet. Security escorted him to a top-floor conference room where Richard Whitman waited with a small team of executives and legal counsel. Whitman, a 58-year-old former military officer who had run the airline for 11 years, rose to greet Isaiah. Mr. Jenkins, thank you for coming. Isaiah remained professional but cool. My son is in physical therapy right now, learning to navigate stairs with a broken femur. I'd appreciate if we could be direct about the purpose of this meeting. Whitman nodded, gesturing to the conference table. Of course. I wanted to express personally how deeply troubled I am by what happened to Malcolm. Troubled enough to implement the structural changes we've proposed, Isaiah asked. Patricia Reynolds, the chief safety officer who had anonymously provided internal documents to Isaiah's team, spoke up. We've reviewed your proposals, Mr. Jenkins. Some are already being implemented. Whitman shot her a look of surprise, clearly unaware of this development. Which ones? Isaiah pressed. Revised hiring protocols with mandatory background checks, immediate suspension of physical intervention for minor passengers, and independent review of all discrimination complaints Patricia listed. Isaiah turned to Whitman. And the rest of our demands. Which ones? Isaiah pressed. More significant than the 40% stock drop you've already experienced, Isaiah countered. Isaiah turned to Whitman. And the rest of our demands? The CEO shifted uncomfortably. Mr. Jenkins, while we're committed to improvement, some of your demands would fundamentally alter our operational structure and create significant shareholder concerns. Isaiah continued, my son asked for water and was physically assaulted by your employees, resulting in a broken femur that will require months of recovery and years of follow-up care. He experiences nightmares, anxiety, and now fears flying, all because of systemic failures in your organization. Isaiah's expression hardened. Let me be very clear. This is not a negotiation about the price tag for my son's trauma. This is your opportunity to prevent this from happening to another child. What exactly are you seeking, Mr. Jenkins? Whitman asked directly. Complete implementation of all 7 reform measures we proposed, public accountability reporting, and the establishment of a passenger advocacy board with real oversight power, Isaiah stated firmly. Plus, compensation directed not just to Malcolm, but to a foundation established in his name to support victims of discrimination in transportation. The executives exchanged glances, clearly unprepared for these terms. That's highly unusual, the general counsel began. So is breaking a child's leg for requesting water? Isaiah replied evenly. Before Whitman could respond, Patricia Reynolds placed a folder on the table. These are incident reports from the past 5 years involving minority passengers. 63 cases, all handled internally, with no public disclosure or meaningful corrective action. The room froze. Patricia had just exposed the company's systematic concealment of discrimination cases in front of their legal counsel and an opposing attorney. Patricia, that's enough, Whitman warned. No, it's not nearly enough, she replied firmly. I've spent 3 years submitting safety recommendations that get ignored because they might impact quarterly profits. An 11-year-old child's leg was broken because this company values procedure over people. Isaiah watched the corporate unity crumble before his eyes as other executives began distancing themselves from Whitman's position. I believe we should seriously consider Mr. Jenkins' proposals, offered the CFO, clearly reading the shifting winds. Isaiah stood, buttoning his suit jacket. I'll give you 48 hours to provide a comprehensive response to our demands. After that, we proceed with litigation, class action filing, and my son's first television interview. As he turned to leave, Whitman called after him. Jenkins, you're asking for a complete overhaul of an 80-year-old company because of one incident. Isaiah paused at the door. No, Mr. Whitman. I'm giving you the opportunity to save your company by acknowledging it wasn't just one incident. It was the inevitable result of a culture you've fostered, and now you can change it or watch it collapse. Outside in the hallway, Zoe waited with Derek, who had been monitoring social media during the meeting. How did it go? Zoe asked. Their chief safety officer just handed us everything we need, Isaiah replied. They'll either meet our demands or face extinction. Derek showed them his tablet. Atlantic Skyways is trending again. Someone leaked audio of Heather Brooks making racist comments during her training period. The boycott has gone international. Isaiah nodded grimly. The board will force Whitman's hand now. They have no choice. As they rode the elevator down, Isaiah's phone rang with a FaceTime call from his mother. He answered to see Malcolm sitting up in bed, proudly holding a science textbook. Dad, Dr. Chen says I can still compete in the Science Olympiad next month if we use a wheelchair. Grandma's helping me practice my presentation. Despite everything, Isaiah smiled at his son's resilience. That's amazing, Malcolm. I'm heading home now. As they walked through the lobby, Isaiah noticed the wall of historical photos chronicling Atlantic Skyway's 8 decades of operation. Soon he knew there would be a new chapter in that history, one forged through his son's suffering, but hopefully leading to lasting change. The battle wasn't over, but for the first time, victory seemed within reach. 2 weeks later, the gleaming conference room on the 40th floor of Atlanta's premier tower hummed with tension. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered spectacular views of the city skyline, but no one was admiring the scenery. Around the massive oak table sat representatives from 2 opposing forces, the Jenkins family and Atlantic Skyways. Malcolm, attending against Isaiah's initial wishes, but at his own insistence, sat in a wheelchair beside his father. His cast had been decorated with colorful signatures and encouraging messages from classmates. Despite his physical discomfort, Malcolm had argued passionately to be present. "It's my leg, Dad," he had reasoned the night before. "I should get to hear what they say about it." Now, as Richard Whitman entered with his executive team, Malcolm straightened in his wheelchair, his young face remarkably composed for an 11-year-old, facing the people responsible for his injury. "Thank you all for agreeing to this meeting," began the mediator, Judge Camila Rodriguez, a retired federal judge, respected for her fairness. "Today's discussion is intended to explore resolution options for all parties." Isaiah, flanked by Zoe Washington and their legal team, nodded acknowledgement. Across the table, Richard Whitman sat between his general counsel and board chairman Edward Phillips, who had flown in from New York specifically for this meeting. The atmosphere suggested this was no ordinary settlement negotiation. "Before we begin," Whitman stated, "I want to personally express my regret to Malcolm for his injury and the pain he has experienced." Malcolm looked directly at the CEO. "Thank you, sir," he replied quietly, his manners impeccable despite the circumstances. Judge Rodriguez turned to Isaiah. "Mr. Jenkins, you've rejected 3 settlement offers from Atlantic Skyways. Perhaps you could explain your position directly to Mr. Whitman and the board." Isaiah leaned forward. "Our position remains unchanged. This case requires more than financial compensation. It demands structural reform to prevent similar incidents in the future." Edward Phillips, the board chairman, interjected. "Mr. Jenkins, while we respect your advocacy, the reforms you're proposing would cost hundreds of millions to implement and fundamentally alter our business model." "And that's precisely the point," Isaiah replied. "Your current business model permitted an 11-year-old child to have his femur broken for requesting water while black. If that model can't accommodate basic human dignity, it deserves to be altered fundamentally." The exchange set the tone for what became an increasingly tense negotiation. For nearly 2 hours, the two sides debated specific reforms, with Atlantic Skyways' team attempting to water down or eliminate the most substantive changes. During a brief recess, Malcolm wheeled himself to the window, gazing out at the Atlanta skyline, while the adults conferred in hushed clusters around the room. Heather Brooks and Darren Walker, who had been waiting in an adjacent room, were brought in for the next phase of discussions. Upon seeing Malcolm by the window, Heather visibly paled. When the meeting reconvened, Isaiah addressed both flight attendants directly. "My son would like to ask you a question," he said, gesturing for Malcolm to speak. Malcolm wheeled himself to the head of the table, his voice steady despite his obvious nervousness. "I've been wondering something since it happened. Did you not give me water because I'm black?" The directness of the question from a child created a palpable silence in the room. Heather looked to her attorneys, who nodded slightly. "I was following company protocols for managing passenger compliance," she began mechanically. "That's not what I asked," Malcolm interrupted with surprising assertiveness. "I asked if you ignored me because I'm black." Heather's rehearsed composure cracked. "I don't see color when I'm doing my job." From the side of the room, Patricia Reynolds, the chief safety officer, spoke up. "That's not true, and the data proves it." She placed a folder on the table. "I've tracked crew response times by passenger demographics for 3 years. Response times to requests from black passengers are on average 12.3 minutes longer than for white passengers in identical situations." This revelation caused immediate commotion among the Atlantic Skyways executives. Whitman glared at Patricia. "That analysis was never authorized." "Which is exactly the problem," Patricia replied firmly. "When I brought these concerns to leadership, I was told to focus on more pressing safety issues." Malcolm, still positioned at the head of the table, turned to Whitman. "Would you have treated me the same if I looked like your son?" The simple question, delivered without anger but with profound gravity, silenced the entire room. The CEO opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again. Visibly struggling, his inability to answer became the most damning response he could have given. In that moment of uncomfortable truth, the board chairman Edward Phillips exchanged glances with other board members present. Something shifted in the room's power dynamic. "I believe," Phillips said slowly, "that we need to reconsider our position." Whitman turned to him in surprise. "Ed, we've discussed this." "No," Richard Phillips interrupted. "We've listened to you, but clearly not to our passengers or our own safety personnel." He turned to Isaiah. "Mister, Jenkins, the board, would like to propose a brief recess to discuss a revised approach. During the 30-minute break that followed, Malcolm remained remarkably composed. "Dad," he said quietly while they waited, "I think they're going to listen now." Isaiah squeezed his son's shoulder gently. "I think so too. And it's because of you." When the meeting reconvened, the change was immediate and dramatic. Edward Phillips took the central seat previously occupied by Whitman, who now sat slightly removed from the table. "The board has made a decision," Phillips announced. "Atlantic Skyways will implement all 7 reform measures proposed by the Jenkins family, effective immediately." Isaiah exchanged surprised glances with Zoe. This sudden capitulation was unexpected. Phillips continued, "Additionally, we are establishing an independent ethics and inclusion board with oversight authority on discrimination issues, and we would like to invite Mr. Jenkins to serve as its inaugural chairperson." The announcement sent ripples of shock through both sides of the table. "As for Miss Brooks," Phillips added, turning to Heather, "your employment with Atlantic Skyways is terminated effective immediately. Mr. Walker will be demoted pending completion of comprehensive bias training." The most stunning announcement came last. Finally, the board has accepted Richard Whitman's resignation as CEO. Patricia Reynolds will serve as interim chief executive while we conduct a search for new leadership. The conference room erupted into controlled chaos as attorneys on both sides hurriedly consulted with their clients. Through it all, Malcolm remained at the head of the table, his presence a powerful reminder of why they were all there. When order was restored, Isaiah addressed Phillips directly. "These are significant steps, Mr. Phillips. But I'm curious about what prompted such a dramatic shift in position." Phillips glanced at Malcolm before answering. "Frankly, Mr. Jenkins, it was your son's question. When our CEO couldn't answer whether he would have treated his own child the same way, it crystallized everything wrong with our culture." He paused. "The board realized that if we couldn't honestly answer that question, we didn't deserve the public's trust." As the meeting concluded, formal documents were prepared for signing. The agreement would be announced publicly the following day, already being hailed internally as the most significant reform in commercial aviation since deregulation. While the attorneys finalized details, Malcolm wheeled himself over to where Heather sat alone, her career effectively ended. Isaiah watched nervously, but allowed his son this moment. "I forgive you," Malcolm said simply. Heather looked up in surprise. "Why?" Malcolm considered the question thoughtfully. "Because staying angry won't help my leg heal faster. And because maybe now you'll learn why what you did was wrong." With that, he wheeled back to his father's side, leaving Heather to contemplate the wisdom that somehow sounded even more profound, coming from an 11-year-old. Heather looked up in surprise. "Why?" "Thank you," she said quietly. "For 3 years I've been collecting data, filing reports, trying to change things from the inside. It shouldn't have taken your son's injury to make people listen." Isaiah nodded in understanding. It often takes a crisis to create change. The important thing is that the change happens. Malcolm looked up at Patricia. "Will airplanes be safer for kids who look like me now?" Patricia knelt beside his wheelchair. "I promise you, Malcolm, I won't stop until they are." As they left the building, reporters clustered outside, caught sight of them, and rushed forward with questions. Isaiah held up a hand for quiet. "There will be a formal announcement tomorrow," he stated. "For now, all I'll say is this. My son asked for water and had his leg broken because of a toxic culture that devalued him based on his race. Today, that culture begins to change." With that, he wheeled Malcolm toward their waiting car, leaving behind a corporation in transformation and a media frenzy that would dominate headlines for weeks to come. The confrontation was over. Now the real work of change would begin. 6 months later, Malcolm Jenkins walked carefully across the stage at the National Junior Science Olympiad, a light brace on his leg, the only visible reminder of his ordeal. The audience erupted in applause as he accepted the silver medal for his project on bone-healing acceleration research inspired by his own recovery experience. Isaiah watched from the front row, pride swelling in his chest. The past half-year had been challenging, filled with surgeries, physical therapy, psychological counseling, and the constant media attention that came with becoming reluctant symbols of both corporate negligence and social change. Yet through it all, Malcolm had shown remarkable resilience. After the ceremony, they returned to their hotel suite where Zoe Washington waited with news. The Federal Aviation Administration just published their final report, she announced, handing Isaiah a tablet. They're implementing the Malcolm Jenkins protocols across all domestic carriers, requiring standardized crew training on discrimination prevention and conflict de-escalation. Isaiah scanned the document. While Malcolm enjoyed his celebratory ice cream sundae, they're actually using his name in the official regulations. Zoe nodded. The name tested well in focus groups. It reminds people that these regulations protect real children, not just abstract principles. Malcolm looked up from his dessert. Does that mean I'm famous now? Isaiah smiled. It means you've made a difference. 2 weeks later, they boarded a flight from Boston back to Atlanta. It wasn't their first flight. Since the incident, Malcolm had insisted on getting back on the horse just 3 months after his injury, showing remarkable courage. But this was their first time flying the newly rebranded Horizon Airways, formerly Atlantic Skyways. The airline had undergone a complete transformation following the Jenkins settlement. New uniforms, new color schemes, new training protocols, and most importantly, new leadership, with Patricia Reynolds confirmed as permanent CEO after her successful interim period. As they settled into their seats, both in first class, this time a flight attendant approached with a tablet. Mr. Jenkins Malcolm, he greeted them warmly. My name is Derek, and I'll be your primary cabin attendant today. We're honored to have you on board. Isaiah nodded acknowledgement, noting the Cultural Competency Certified pin on Derek's uniform, one of the many changes implemented under the settlement agreement. Can I bring you both something to drink before takeoff? Derek offered. Water, please, Malcolm replied, the simple request carrying emotional weight for both him and his father. Right away, Derek responded, promptly returning with 2 bottles of water and an explanation about the call button system. As the plane taxied for takeoff, Isaiah noticed other subtle changes throughout the cabin. Prominently displayed on the seatback cards was information about the Passenger Bill of Rights, another requirement from the settlement. Flight attendants interacted with all passengers with careful attention to equitable treatment. Dad Malcolm whispered excitedly, "Look at the safety video." On the screens played a completely redesigned safety presentation, featuring diverse families demonstrating procedures. The narrator specifically mentioned accommodations for children and passengers with disabilities, previously overlooked demographics. Midway through the flight, Patricia Reynolds herself emerged from the cockpit, having been on board to observe the crew's implementation of new protocols. She made her way to their row. Malcolm, Isaiah, she greeted them warmly. I hope everything meets your expectations today. It's very different, Malcolm observed. In a good way, Patricia nodded. We've retrained every employee, revised every procedure. But the most important change isn't visible, it's in how we think about our responsibility to passengers. She handed Malcolm a small package. This is the first copy of our new Junior Passenger Welcome Kit. Your foundation helped design it. The Malcolm Jenkins Foundation for Transportation Equity, established with a portion of the settlement funds, had grown into a respected advocacy organization in just 6 months. Already, it had assisted 3 other families whose children had experienced discrimination on various transportation systems. The ethics board meeting is next Tuesday, Patricia confirmed with Isaiah. He nodded. We'll be reviewing the quarterly compliance data. Early results look promising. As part of the settlement, Isaiah now served as chairperson of Horizon Airways' Independent Ethics and Inclusion Board with genuine oversight authority, including access to complaint data and hiring decisions. What had begun as a corporate defense mechanism was evolving into a model other companies were studying for implementation. After Patricia returned to her duties, Malcolm turned to his father. Remember when you said my voice would make a difference? I do. I didn't believe you then, Malcolm admitted. I just wanted my leg to stop hurting. Isaiah put his arm around his son's shoulder. Sometimes the most important changes come from the most painful experiences. Like how my science project might help other kids with broken bones. Exactly like that. As they began their descent into Atlanta, Isaiah reflected on their journey. The settlement had provided substantial financial compensation, enough to secure Malcolm's education through graduate school if he chose, but the structural changes were the true victory. Heather Brooks had faced civil penalties and was now working with anti-bias organizations as part of her personal rehabilitation. Darren Walker, after intensive training, had become an unexpected ally, speaking candidly about the flaws in the system that had shaped his behavior. Most significantly, the Malcolm Jenkins standards were being implemented across the transportation industry. Airlines, railways, and bus companies were proactively revising their practices rather than waiting for their own costly incidents. After landing, they were surprised to find Elaine Winters waiting in the terminal. The elderly woman who had defended Malcolm on that fateful flight had become something of a surrogate grandmother to him during his recovery. Heather Brooks had faced civil penalties and was now working with anti-bias organizations as part of her personal rehabilitation. Darren Walker, after intensive training, had become an unexpected ally, speaking candidly about the flaws in the system that had shaped his behavior. Isaiah followed more slowly, greeting Elaine with a warm hug. "You didn't have to come all this way." "Of course I did," she insisted. "I wouldn't miss the celebration." The celebration was a small ceremony scheduled for the following day, where Malcolm would be recognized by the governor for his contributions to transportation safety. His story had transcended the initial viral outrage to become a case study in how individual advocacy could drive systemic change. That evening, after Elaine had gone to her hotel and Malcolm was preparing for bed, Isaiah found his son standing before the living room wall where they had hung his medal alongside news clippings chronicling their journey. "Something on your mind, champ?" Isaiah asked. Malcolm traced the headline that had started it all. "Flight attendant snaps black boy's leg, father shuts down airline." "Do you think Mom would be proud of what we did?" he asked quietly. Isaiah felt his throat tighten with emotion. "She would be beyond proud, Malcolm. Not just because we fought back, but because of how we did it. We didn't just seek justice for ourselves, we created change for others." Malcolm nodded thoughtfully. "That's what I thought too." As Isaiah tucked his son into bed later, he noticed a new drawing on Malcolm's desk, a detailed sketch of an airplane with diverse passengers and crew, all smiling. At the bottom, Malcolm had written, "Everyone gets water." Such a simple concept, Isaiah thought. Such a basic human dignity. Yet it had taken his son's broken bone to make an industry recognize it. The next morning, as they prepared for the governor's ceremony, Isaiah received an email from a major consumer protection organization. They wanted to present Malcolm with their annual Catalyst Award, given to individuals whose actions sparked significant social change. "Another award?" Malcolm asked when told about it. "But I didn't do anything special. I just asked for water." Isaiah knelt to his son's eye level. Sometimes, the most powerful act of resistance is simply asking for what everyone deserves. You taught an entire industry that lesson. As they headed out the door, Malcolm walking with just a slight limp, now a news alert pinged on Isaiah's phone. 2 more airlines had announced adoption of the Malcolm Jenkins standards, citing improved passenger satisfaction and decreased incident reports during their trial implementation. "Look at that," Isaiah showed his son. "Your legacy keeps growing." Malcolm considered this with the thoughtfulness that had become characteristic of him since the incident. "I think I want to be a lawyer like you when I grow up," he decided. "Or maybe a scientist. Or both." Isaiah smiled. "You can be anything you want, Malcolm. And whatever you choose, you'll carry this experience with you, knowing that one voice, even a young one, can change the world when it speaks truth." They walked to the car together, father and son, attorney and client, but most importantly, catalysts for a transformation that would benefit countless children who would never know Malcolm's pain, but would forever be protected by his courage. The flight attendant had snapped Malcolm's leg, but in doing so had unwittingly helped him and his father reshape an industry's moral compass. It wasn't the justice they had initially sought, but it was the change the world needed. This powerful story teaches us that true justice goes beyond financial compensation. It demands structural change. Malcolm's experience shows how racial discrimination often hides behind policy and protocol, creating systems that disproportionately harm people of color. When Isaiah refused to accept a simple settlement, he demonstrated that transformative justice requires addressing root causes. The story also highlights the courage it takes to speak truth to power. Malcolm's simple question: would you have treated me the same if I looked like your son, cut through corporate deflection and forced honest reflection? Sometimes the most powerful challenges come from the most vulnerable voices. We see how documentation and evidence are crucial in fighting discrimination. Without Jordan's video recording witnesses like Elaine and Patricia's data collection, this might have been dismissed as an isolated incident rather than recognized as a pattern of behavior. Perhaps most importantly, this story reminds us that one person can spark change that benefits countless others. Malcolm's suffering became the catalyst for industry-wide reforms that will protect children he'll never meet. True healing often comes through ensuring others won't experience the same injustice. Number. Final thoughts. What moment in this story resonated with you most deeply? Was it Malcolm's courage, Isaiah's determination, or perhaps when the CEO couldn't answer that simple, powerful question? Comment below with your thoughts. If you believe more stories like this need to be shared, please hit that like button and subscribe for more powerful narratives about justice prevailing against discrimination. Share this with someone who needs to be reminded that speaking truth to power can create meaningful change. Thank you for watching and being part of this important conversation. Remember, sometimes the smallest voices ask the questions that transform entire industries.